guys, double tap the screen. It does help go a long way. It's been a while since I've gone live, so I am going to be a lot more consistent. So yeah, anyways, let's add him on. Let's carry on the debate. And feel free to subscribe as well too, and check out the YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I apologize about that. I have a lot going on. I may actually look. We should like schedule something because I have actually a lot going on right now. But yeah, look, I dropped you a follow on here. You can follow me back. We can continue for like probably 5-10 more minutes though, if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, look, man. You can follow me back. We can continue. So yeah, look, man. Okay, so I asked you for a rational justification for atheism. You propose like
Scripture is saying God is perfect and God is good. When you make those claims that God is all good, and then we observe a contradiction in his nature and the actions that, in fact, he's not all good, and even in the problem of creation itself, then contradictions do like debunk your point of view and your worldview.
Yeah, so when we just simply say that God is good, okay, is good. Okay, so like, okay, I think there's a couple of different things here. So like, you believe that there are things that are like, you believe that badness is something that like actually exist, right?
It's an objective that's based on what people think, and in your case, it's based on what God thinks.
No, we wouldn't actually say it's based on what God thinks, and so I think that
It's based on what God thinks.
No, we wouldn't actually say it's based on what God thinks, and so I think that's why it's very important that I asked you man theory. And again, if you're providing an internal, simply say that God is good. We're just simply saying that what goodness is, God is numerically identical to. So when we look in reality, right, and you say, well, how can a good God produce a reality that is bad? Your presupposition is that reality is bad. So you're just simply looking at reality and you're saying, well, based on the way that I feel, I think that reality should be this way other than the way that it is right now. And then we can just
hold on one second. Isn't that based on what God's feel? Doesn't God acknowledge that this morality, that this reality is bad? I mean, the regret after the flood, clearly showing that the bad acts that we do are clearly not desirable. It's not a desirable state.
Yeah, great question there, bro. So there's a fundamental distinction between like God's sovereignty and like and moral propositions, right? And so when we just simply say that reality is ultimately good, we're just simply saying that the state of affairs that are occurring now are the state of affairs that God has purposed to occur for his own reason. Now you might ask, well, there's all these bad things that happen. So you're saying and like of affairs that God has purposed to occur for his own reason. Now you might ask, well, there's all these bad things that happen. So you're saying that God is purposing them? Well, that's where we get to an interesting verse in the Bible, Genesis chapter 50, verse 21, where Joseph says, well, simultaneous relation between moral propositions in the sense that like our actions, right? So like, for instance, like if I were to, okay, not even me, like let's just say person X, right? If person X were to go outside and just like, commit a crime, right? Well, we would say, well, that crime was bad, right? But when we say all things considered, was it ultimately bad? The answer is no, right? The crime is only bad in disposition to was it ultimately bad? The answer is no, right? The crime is only bad in this moral law.
I think
but there's a fundamental distinction between God's moral law and God's sovereignty. Go ahead.
I think the issue that you run into is that the point is that God didn't necessarily need to make things this way for things to turn out to be good. I know you're probably making the claim of, oh, well, this certain bad thing was all part of God's plan and that God turned into something good. The whole point is that he could have made a world and a reality in which that never needed to be the case because it would have all been good. And God, being all knowing, knew that it would eventually turn to be that case. So that doesn't really add up in the case that essentially, if God is all powerful, he was able to make powerful, he was able to make a world in which none of the bad things needed to happen, literally none at all. And so you saying that, oh, it works all good in the end, it doesn't really add up, and it's kind of logically contradictory. Especially if he's all good, he would want to make a world in which everything is good, and so none of this would need to be the case, and he'd be more all powerful as well. And in the case of free will, we acknowledge God has free will and he's all good, so he could have made us that way, but he chose not to, hence he's not all good. I don't see how you've not debunked that, so feel free to kind of, I guess, respond.
Yeah, brother. So a couple of different things. So, yeah. So when we say that God is all good, again, you're looking at reality and you're saying, well, this reality is in one propositional set because perfection by definition is exclusive.
See, just don't believe that holds up though, because again, I feel like in that case, you'd be kind of like taking down against God's omnipotence and the fact that he's not all powerful and that things had to be a certain way. It's kind of leading to deterministic views. So thank you so much, Hammers, for the roses. And it's kind of leading to deterministic views that things had to be this way rather than the fact that they could have, if he's all powerful, he could have made things another way too. And I just don't think that adds up. And I feel like you're using a lot of jargon saying he's a necessary existence when it doesn't really add up when you actually look at it logically.
Okay, so when you're saying that thing, okay, so when you're saying that like it somehow would constrain God's omnipotence by there being one state of affairs, you have to prove that. When we just say that God, when we're saying God is all powerful, all we're simply saying is that God can do anything that's logically possible, which just simply means that he can actualize a state of affairs that is possible. It doesn't necessarily mean that he can actualize any possible state of affairs. It just meaning that he can actualize state of affairs that is possible. I think you're conflating like God possibly being able to enact any state of affairs or God being capable of enacting a state of affairs that is possible. I think there's a fundamental distinction there that we need to make. Also, God just being the unifying principle or the unifying state by which all propositions by which all propositional states are derived. You would have to, if you don't hold to God's existence, then the problem of evil, again, isn't actually a problem because all you're going to simply be doing is providing an internal critique. And if you're using my worldview, again, we just hold that God is goodness itself. So if the conclusion of your argument is, well, bad reality, therefore God not good, that would just, you couldn't provide an internal critique on that because our starting axiom is God is good. That's our axiom.
I guess I'm just like, I guess we just have a fundamental disagreement in the nature of God and what he's possibly can do. You're saying that it's not a state of affairs and that he could have made a world in which everything was good. I'm saying that even by his logic and by what he's been able to do, that he can, and if he's all-knowing and omniscient, that he would have been able to make a state of affairs like that. And God himself acknowledges that the world was not good, the world is not good. We know God does not see that as a desirable state of affairs. And so in that case, if he was all-knowing and all-powerful, he'd basically know how to make a world in which everything went according to his will and things were good. He acknowledges things are bad. And so essentially, it's kind of a contradiction. And even in the word as well, it says, I create the evil as well. And so it is kind of there's kind of even more word jargon that's kind of contradictory as well.
So a couple different things there. So again, there's a fundamental distinction between how God refers to things being bad in reality. When God says that things are bad in reality, all he simply is saying is according to the disposition of the moral law, things that are departed from that moral law are bad. He's not saying that ultimately him being good and the ground of all being, that bad action is not going to be used for a means of good. That is not what God is saying. Also, secondly, when you bring up Isaiah 45:7, where it says, I create good, right? And I also, create evil. It says that in the KJV. Right. But if you look at like the ESV or some more modern translations, it's going to use the word calamity. All it's simply saying is that God brings judgment or what some philosophers would call natural evil, which is just simply how God uses nature to judge us. So like, back in the Bible with Sodom and Gomorrah, he rained fire down from heaven. Also, we get, the flood story where, God, just totally floods and destroys everything. And then he, promised not to do that. But yeah, all these are what we just would call natural evils. Some philosophers would say. I don't call it natural evils. I would just call it the judgment of God. So yeah.
I mean, I guess we can just agree to disagree. Thank you for the gifts, Hammers. Thank you so much for the gifts. But I guess we can just agree to disagree again. I just again have a point of contention in the fact that he couldn't have made things differently. And you can use translations to try and kind of avoid a certain point. But I mean that's sure because the verse, of course, that you mentioned, I believe that it does basically literally says, "I create the evil." But if you want to use translations, then sure. But regardless, I
Not
still
necessarily using.
that.
I'm
Pardon?
sorry. No, yeah. Look. It's not necessarily using translations. I'm just simply like this. So the Bible it uses a lot of anthropomorphic language. So it's when we describe a concept using humanistic qualities. So like when the Bible when God says, "Well, I regretted doing this," it's not the case that God actually regrets things, right? It's just the Bible is saying that so that we can better understand who God is. So like when we understand God, we have to understand him in human terms, but God is not a human, right? And so like it's just trying to understand him in human terms. When I say God's not a human, Jesus is God, he is a human, but I just simply mean that God is as the divine nature, as a spirit, is not going to be a human. Just want to clarify that for everyone in the live.
Okay, then I mean, sure, but again, of course, as you mentioned, God, Jesus being God in the flesh, that would kind of like disrupt that. And even in that case, also, if the Bible was written by people, which it was, then it kind of runs to the other issue of then you don't even understand God yourself, because especially with the way it's been retranslated over thousands of years, there's a lot of issues in the fact that it's been changed so much that you don't even understand God yourself, and so it's impossible to make claims about a being which you don't understand. And so essentially, but even in that case, even if we do go by the translations and all of that, we can still, I believe, we still can find internal inconsistencies as well as contradictions in your religious doctrine. But
Okay, so a couple of different things, man, because you're saying like